Hi guys, my name is Hamdi. I'm actually not a doctor yet. There's a bit of wishful thinking. I'm in the last year of my PhD. So, I trained as a biomedical scientist, and then I done my master's in public health, and now I'm in the middle of my PhD at Imperial College London. And in my PhD, I study the opportunities and challenges inherent in the diffusion of healthcare innovations and sort of ideas spreading across country borders. And I study this diffusion through the vehicle of international health partnerships. So I'll be using my research into the knowledge diffusion in international health partnerships to really start a conversation around the Turkey-Somali relations and considerations for how we should look at creating mutually beneficial partnerships between Turkey and Somalia. To begin with, the deepening relations between Turkey and the Somali region is an exciting time for the Horn, and no one can really deny that. But it's popular knowledge that Turkey's unprecedented sort of engagement in the Horn really stemmed from a humanitarian response to the 2011 famine. So in 2011, Somalia did not enter this partnership on an equal playing field, if you will. Turkey took the role of the traditional aid donor, and Somalia the traditional recipient. A scenario that was fitting for that period. But in the realm of rethinking, however, 7 years on, and many development projects later, and as these two partners work on implementing future projects, the once necessary development model that was being utilized, the aid model, is no longer fitting if we're to consider sustainable impacts. So in the realm of rethinking development partnerships and to create sustainable impacts, I invite a discussion around the taken for granted norms and hidden assumptions within our institutions. And I argue that this concept of reverse innovation in international health partnerships, that I'll go on to explain a bit later on, creates this necessary alternative discourse that might open up the possibility of mutually beneficial partnerships. So we start by just painting a quick picture of the global health space. On the whole, the international development architecture is categorized by a unidirectional flow of human resources, knowledge, and finances. For decades, governments in richer countries have mobilized themselves to send significant funding and resources to countries in the global south to support their fragile states. However, in the global health space, in many higher income countries, what we're starting to notice is that narratives around reciprocity, co-development, and shared learning are starting to gain more momentum. In the UK, where I live, a lot of this momentum is being spearheaded by a gentleman called Lord Nigel Crisp. I draw reference to Lord Crisp because in 2010, he wrote a book that was provocatively titled Turning the World Upside Down. He was asked by the then Prime Minister, Tony Blair, to go out into the world and look at the ways that the UK could best use its expertise to improve health in developing countries. So Lord Crisp went to different countries and explored what was happening in those settings and looking at their healthcare innovations. And he went on to suggest that actually the center of the world is shifting. And through his book, Lord Crisp boldly challenges high-income countries and their healthcare professionals to seriously rethink their approach to engaging with low-middle-income countries, and this pervasive desire to really impose ideas, solutions, and ethoses onto countries of the global south, creating this tendency almost to overlook any innovations or resource savviness occurring in those settings. He goes on to document opportunities to learn from low-income countries, highlighting this need for mutual learning in global health systems. And this need for mutual learning in global health systems is becoming even more apparent as we recognize the enormity of the changes and challenges our own healthcare systems are facing in much richer countries. What is starting to become more of a reality is this potential to also learn from other countries, including countries that have been doing more with less for many years. And that is sort of the process of reverse innovation. Fundamentally, the reverse innovation agenda emphasizes that great ideas are great ideas irrespective of their source. Across global health partnerships, there's this growing body of literature showcasing this drive towards mutual interest, and that both partners should actually benefit from this engagement. but yet instances where knowledge actually diffuses from the low-income country partner to the high-income country partner are very scarce. So it begs the question, what are some of the barriers and challenges to achieving demonstrable gains for both partners? A large share of my own PhD focuses on this critical question. And in my own research, I turned to the theoretical literature to shed light on this complexity, and in particular, theoretical perspectives exploring power imbalances, global knowledge hierarchies, and cognitive biases, to help us sort of understand some of the structural and epistemic barriers to reciprocity, and therefore achieving mutual benefits in international health partnerships, especially as we sort of consider Turkish-Somali relations moving forward. If we start by looking at global knowledge hierarchies, when we're talking about mutually beneficial partnerships, essentially what we're referring to the spread of knowledge and ideas between two countries that at the level of the worldview are ultimately very different. One of the most important contributions to understanding global knowledge hierarchies is the work of Edward Said. Said's most prominent work in critiquing Orientalism largely examines the impacts of imperialism on our culture. So you may ask, why is this important in the process of evening out the playing field in partnerships? In 1978, Said argued that scholars from the East cannot afford to ignore what goes on in the scholarly journals, institutes, and universities of the US and Europe, yet the converse is not true. In here, he was describing an asymmetric ignorance whereby knowledge generated by the West cannot be discounted by non-Western society, whilst there's not a similar emphasis for non-Western knowledge. While Said's work explored the relations between the West and the East, asymmetric ignorance isn't merely a case of European history. This asymmetric ignorance appears to exist even in relations between non-Western economically advanced countries and less economically advanced countries. As a way of example, in my own research interviewing healthcare professionals in health partnerships, the data reveals that actually this asymmetry is also visible in partnerships between Asia and Latin American countries that pair up with African countries, where in these relations, the emerging economies almost assume the role of the West in the absence of the West. And this asymmetric ignorance goes on to pave the way for hierarchies in knowledge order that places knowledge generated by the richer country at the top of this proverbial pyramid, to which poorer countries are left to just draw reference. Indeed, in global health partnerships, the richer countries routinely expose low-income countries and their partners to approaches and models of care for consideration, and so they rightly should. But in that respect, if we're to consider creating truly mutually beneficial partnerships, there needs to be structures and processes in place within these partnerships that create similar frequent opportunities for low-income countries to also share their ideas and innovations. If I turn to now the power mechanisms inherent in international relations, when we're analysing power differentials in global partnerships, this complexity isn't merely confined to, for example, partner A having power over partner B in, for example, setting the agenda or making decisions for the partnership. Indeed, that does exist, but these tensions stretch beyond what's observable conflicts to what some scholars call a third dimension of power. And this involves the subtle aspects of manipulation that have the ability to control an individual's perception of what is true. So it's no longer about one partner being excluded from the decision-making process, but really it's about a subtle form of power that makes certain partners believe they don't even have something to contribute, something to teach, or learning to share. It's in this insidious dimension to power in partnerships that domination is secured through compliance. So when we're discussing imbalances in partnerships, it's often very easy to focus on what the rich country may or may not have done to contribute to this imbalance. But equally, the role of the low-income country partner requires attention. So at this juncture, I would actually like to hone in on my own research to illustrate instances where this inferiority complex is very pervasive in global partnerships. In my study, I interview healthcare professionals that are engaging in health partnerships. My case study is the Norwegian context, but typically when we're talking about healthcare partnerships between the global north and the global south, what you see is that the high-income country partner will send their doctors, nurses, and allied health professionals overseas for capacity building, sharing their skills and know-how. And that's the traditional model adopted by most countries. And that was a model also being used by Norway, up until about 20 years ago. Where essentially what happened was, in the Norwegian context, is there was a shift in mindset. They realized that as Norway we have much to give the world, but we are not the sole providers of knowledge, and that we have much to learn as well. But we cannot learn if we're simply sending our healthcare professionals overseas. So we must be able to receive people as well. So as of 2000, there was a government mandate that actually doesn't, health partnerships will not be funded in Norway unless healthcare professionals from the Norwegian institution go overseas and they receive recipients from the low-income country. So there's this bi-directional exchange of human personnel. So interestingly, these partnerships are funded on the premise that both countries have something to teach and both countries have something to learn. And yet, in the interviews that I was having with the low-income country partner, I would often hear comments that fed into countries reinforcing their own subordination. Comments such as, "What can I teach the Norwegians? I should learn myself and not be the one to teach them. I'm very thankful to the Norwegians. I gain 100% and I don't know if an occasion will arise where I can teach them something." Essentially, the empirical evidence illustrates that there's this very intimate relationship between power and knowledge that paves the way for superiority and inferiority complexes in global partnerships. So whilst redressing this imbalance in knowledge flow across global partnerships requires the richer partner to be open to the possibility of learning from their low-income partner, the call for low-income partners to be more assertive and deliberate in their position as equal knowledge brokers has never been greater. And last but not least, the literature on cognitive psychology really provides a useful lens to examine some of the biases and prejudices inherent in learning from outside the establishment. In particular, the not invented here syndrome, a form of cognitive bias that is present within institutional cultures, articulates a bias against ideas originating elsewhere. The not invented here culture is often stronger when it comes to considering ideas from low-income countries. Actually, the empirical evidence for bias against low-income countries is compelling. If I start with just an example of perhaps what was one of the first attempts to reverse innovate in the UK. Now, the Brazilian community health worker model is considered to be one of the most successful examples of primary care reform. Studies show that it has high user satisfaction and that it's cost-effective. In 2013, a paper describes the journey that health system leaders went through in an attempt to explore the possibility of piloting this model in North Wales. The group noted a bias against promising ideas because of where it was successful. And they described that some local stakeholders expressed serious doubts about the possibility of a developing country having something to teach a rich country. Similar sentiments are noted in other studies, with ideas from low-income countries being discounted early on or seen as non-traditional, because country-level stereotypes interfere with valuable learning. So essentially, these implications provide context to some of the surfacing unsavory attitudes that knowledge from the richer partner is superior and cannot be overlooked, but ideas from and innovations from the low-income country partner can be. Increasingly, the word aid is being replaced by global partnerships, but a shift in linguistic doesn't mean a shift in practice. In this era of transparency and accountability, if these partners wish to exert themselves as distinct from other global health technical corporations, where their point of departure is predominantly humanitarian assistance and development aid, models that aim to maximize the benefit for the developing country alone, there is a need for partners to really be more deliberate in defining their specific aims and its interconnection with mutual benefits. Indeed, the value-added contribution of altruism in global partnerships cannot be denied, but its solitude, it does not necessitate a bi-directional flow of ideas or knowledge. Reducing the subjective attention given to rich country practices and ideas may sound like an impossible undertaking for many. But it's really this methodical refocusing of the international gaze away from ideas just because they're from a rich country towards great ideas, regardless of where they're from, that can really flatten any superficial differences that we see in global partnerships and perhaps open up the possibility of mutual benefits. Thank you.